Hello, welcome to First Fridays in the Exchange. This is the second art talk in the 2021-2022 season. And there are a whole bunch of art events and open galleries and video art to see tonight. Our What's On calendar is available for viewing on our website at firstfridayswinnipeg.org. And there are lots of events open for viewing, seeing, there's art to buy and experience. And there are some things that will still be open after this talk, so make sure you have your mask and your proof of vaccination where required. Please be aware that there may be capacity limits and possibly appointments that you may or may not need to make. I personally want to highlight the plug-in gallery. Their current exhibition is Where Veins Meet Like Rivers, and it is open until December 17th. There are images on Plugin's website as well, and a very interesting exhibition essay that one can read. So we just want to do a territory acknowledgement now. And could we see that slide, please, Erin? So the First Fridays organization was started in order to encourage people to come to the Exchange District in Winnipeg. We acknowledge that the Exchange District is located within Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Nahiawewuk, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We'd like to work together towards greater understanding and acting on how to decolonize art, artistic practice, and public discourse. I'd like to take this time to introduce our guest. Elder Dr. Ellen Cook is from Misipawistik, the Singing Waters, Grand Rapids, Misipawistik Cree Nation. She grew up listening to the sounds of the rapids and remembers the beauty and the gifts of this land every day. Elder Dr. Ellen Cook teaches Nahiawewin teachers to teach Nahiawewin in many communities and multiple treaty territories. She received an honorary doctorate of canon law honoris causa from the University of Manitoba. And as a co-chair for the Interchurch Council on Hydropower, Elder Dr. Ellen Cook partners with Waniskatan Research Alliance and the Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition. And she's a research collaborator for the gendered impacts of hydro projects with U of M. She also sits on the Hydro Accountability Board, and she uses art projects to communicate, lament, and educate. So welcome, Tansei, Dr. Ellen Cook.
Anse Niminoyan.
Mananto, Niminoya Nanto.
Niminoyan.
I'd just like to show a few slides of the community where you grew up. Some slides that you shared with me from a long time ago. The first one is from 100 years ago. It's from, yeah, exactly 100 years ago. You can see the limestone cliffs and the waves. And the next one is from the 1950s. You could still see the limestone cliffs. And in the next slide, we have some of the rapids, and the caption here on this, it's a black and white photo, and you can see the waters are running quickly. And you had said to me earlier that your dad said he could run the rapids up and down in the dark because he knew them so well, and he did, and everyone else in the community knew that he could. The next slide is the same photograph, but we have a different caption here, which is that as your father was the expert boatsman on the river, he was the one to navigate the rapids, and he took the first visitors from Hydro up and down the rapids and showed them the water, but the people from Hydro did not bring a translator. And so they weren't able to speak their intentions to him. And from there, I did want to talk about your work as a translator, and we're going to come back to the Rapids many times during this conversation. Do you want to talk a little bit about the work that you do as a language keeper?
Well, I've been teaching teachers how to teach Cree since 2009. I started off part-time working with my sister, and because I was still teaching in a public school. And then once I retired in 2010, I started doing it on a regular basis. So I would drive up to the PAW for a week at a time, teach a cohort of teachers that were education assistants in schools. Most of them were already working in the school. I won't say all of them, but most of them were working in the school. And they wanted Cree teachers where they're very hard to come by. So University College of the North decided that they should be training people how to teach Cree. So my sister and I would teach a group of students from September till June, and then they would graduate with a diploma in June. And most of them ended up becoming teachers. And some of them have gone on to become certified teachers, gone on to university, and some have even completed their master's degrees in the Cree language. So I consider that program, it's called in a Nimwin diploma program. I consider it a very effective program because teachers have gone on to become Cree teachers in the schools.
What did you find were some of the topics that that the Cree teachers really were curious about and had sort of language deficits about? What were some of the things that and topics that you talked about and helped them with?
Well, the most interesting thing was that majority of them had no idea that our language was not gender-based. There was no he or she in our language. And then they would say, well, how do we distinguish? And then I would give them some ideas, some questions like, how do you say this tree in Cree? And they'd say, awamistic. And I say, how would you say this girl? They say, awaisquasis. And then I would ask, how do you say this dish, for example? They'd say, oma unagan. Uma and awa. Awa meaning it's an animate, uma meaning it's inanimate. And then I would explain to them, that's the difference. One is animate and one is inanimate. And it was always such a surprise to them. But if I were to say, that we have animate and inanimate in our language, and they say, no, we don't have that. If I didn't do the examples first, they didn't realize that there was this difference in our language.
So it sounds like it's like a completely different binary. Like in English, we're used to like having a gendered binary, but it sounds like there is like an animate or inanimate binary in Cree. What are some surprising things that you wouldn't think would be, like, are there any foods that some of them are animate or plants, some are animate and some are inanimate?
Well, I wouldn't say surprising thing is that a rock or a stone is animate, but a flower is inanimate. And there's really no explanation why, except that we say the grandfathers, right, when we talk about the rock. And then there's a strawberry that's inanimate, but a raspberry is animate. So we say, Uma uteimin, awa anuskan. Uma meaning inanimate, awa meaning animate. So it's it's the same in French and in German, because what makes a table a feminine noun in French, whereas in German, it's a masculine noun. We say der Tisch and la table. Der Tisch in German, la table in French. So in German, it's masculine. In French, it's feminine. It's just the way language develops, I guess.
So that's 4 languages that you know. Are there others besides German, French, English, and Cree that you know?
Well, I know a little bit of Anishinaabe, enough to have taught it to the teachers in the Winnipeg School Division. And Oji Cree, I lived in Island Lake and I helped them, the elders develop the Oji Cree dictionary when I was there. But Oji Cree, Ojibwe, and Cree are similar in terms of vocabulary. The difference is enough that some people do not understand all 3 of them. Just because they know one, they don't understand all 3. But because I worked in Ojibwe community and an Oji Cree community and a Cree community, I kind of knew what the differences were and can understand them when they speak.
You're used to hearing them. Well, I'd love to look at some of your translation work. There's a film that that we're going to show some clips from the other end of the line, hydropower in northern Manitoba. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the person, like how this came about, and the person that like did the camera work and some of the relationships that you were working together, like some of the organizations that you're working with and the relationships that you formed that sort of all funneled and were resources into making this project. Maybe we can start with the filmmaker that you worked with, Matthew Sawatsky. How did you meet him?
Matthew Sawatsky was known by one of our ICH, like Interchurch Council on Hydropower, by 1 or 2 of the people. And we needed a videographer and a cameraman that would travel with me up north to the hydro-affected communities. And because I had contacts up there, they thought it would be good if I went along, and because I could speak Cree and interview the people in Cree. So we asked Matthew Sawatsky if he would come. He was already working in videography and photography, and had been a student at CMU, Mennonite University. So we hired him, and it was quite an experience for him because he had never, stayed on a reserve, and we were staying on the reserves where we went. We went first to Nelson House, and then first Easterville, and then Grand Rapids, and Nelson House, and Split Lake, and South Indian Lake. And it's a good experience for him too, a learning experience for him too. And it was just him and I traveling together, and it was really good. We had gotten some extra money and we had always wanted to do something in terms of awareness for people down south here about what happens to the communities when hydro comes in there and builds a huge electric generating station. And because just talking, like I had been talking to various high schools and churches and other organizations, talking to them about that, the impacts of hydro development in the north. But we figured that maybe having photographs and videos would be much more, because we say that the picture's worth 1,000 words. So we went up there and we took, Matthew took the photographs, and we interviewed the elders in the communities.
Well, let's have the first community, or the first clip that we're going to see, is the one of Betsy Flett. So could we see the community's names, Aaron? Our technical person is the slide changer. So here we have the names of the communities. And just, I'm going to try to say these, Ellen. Can you stand it? Okay, we have Misipawistik, Misipawistik, Chimawawanik, Tatasquiac, Opipon Napiwin. Which community is Betsy Flett from? That is the community we're gonna see first.
Tatasquiac.
Tatasquiac. And Tatasquiac, can you say a little bit about this film came out in 2013. So when she was talking about them building the dam at Tatasquiac. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, or do you want to see the clip right away?
Well, I can see a little bit about it because they did protest. They didn't want that kiosk built because they already had electric generating station that had impacted their community from years before, and that was the Kelsey generating station. And the kiosk dam was going to be built along the same area, and a lot of the people didn't want it, and they blockaded Hydro from entering the kiosk area. And Betsy was front and center. She was a real activist. I'm sure she still would be now if she could get around, but she's in her mid-90s now, so she's not getting around very much. I actually visited her in July and was very happy to see her.
Nice. Well, she sure is spunky in this video clip. Let's see her speaking, and the subtitles that you see on the bottom are Ellen's translation.
Tago banyan Thompson. Gursi sa pimpan sige utawamat. Ako tago tanda di sapo. Happy apurs ko ito tabanas. Marang ispanin nante. Marang ispanin nasa kaya gatpa hisigano nito. Tago banyan Thompson ispanyan. Marang yapa hisigano. Ego na mapero ba't manawa na kanta. Ego tapak pa hisigano. Wala ginande tao. Ai true. Tanda tu esi satu skeno tanda tau. 3 years itu. 3 years inte kan ai true. Kani pe konan tanda skuatte me pe pahisi inte tau. Anta ya standard de skuatte me pahisi kan pahisan mani inte tau. De tu esta magon kursi sota yepit. Datus kan pomtik. Mani na no sana so antik. Ego tentigan. Ego mama gine pigon na maneto skin dita ginagi pepa kise kanu tanta sin dita. Dita na mister na bana na mister. Kone ko dagi apede. Kone ko dagi apene na na panoni apene ko pa petanda pa hite kana. Ako tagasting me pano de vista deta. Asa masinay kaso pai emisigitit. Pai masinay kaso asay. Mutita sinay kaso asay. Asa ona sinay kaso. Anak pai wata epit. Mitton episi sa nemasta sinay kaso ya hanema. Pisi sa napaya minigaw ya. Ako inood yun doon mamakasinday kaso te. Kone, waka kiwan na maningaw na wapa hindi tao ni sini wichi. Istande ni simbata. Mga on nawaita na gasur paita. Ase kosi. Asaki kaya si nandi ta mana onan. Eitis trinda työsi nanova. Eitis trime vad nu mustaten. Adoni no mä aski minne vuosi anista. Enä nasko monoa. Eno hematsia ne man desegisin aski ovattavan. Mi oskaatsain desegisin. Jostakin. Heti sen aikosti keti. Se onkin. Heti vägen vaunussa vai tiedä. Ei voi se voi kisvittämättä koko.
Let's look at the next clip with Madeline Spence, Elder Madeline Spence. Which community, Ellen, is Madeline Spence from?
She's from Misipawistik. She's no longer in this world. She's gone onto the spirit world with her husband, Wellington Spence.
So Misipawistik is Nelson House where three rivers meet, Brentwood, Footprint, and the Rat Rivers. So let's have a listen to Madeline Spence.
Diskijana keitnar mistaigu on tuuttagawiak kakitiskipatsakan. Kividyitä maakissa kajas kakipisik matsuak. Mutsimi kakivaski kisakakiusik matsua kakitakiwan aski kakiutnavak. Kakipisik pakiknikuisavuutaski. Kakimipikuisia kakihikikuanautaski tapatsitaya. Kwani Stegi pinsona cetanono. Mijikki wan kuitavitiitinan. Aspin vatiskipi. Maskiikia. Step matse oi mitsisuun. Mijikki kuitavitiimananak. Pisiskiva. Pidisisakan. Akuutiomakajajaan kapikakijajaan. Akoninan mistä ei päätty sinä vuonna siitä, kun ei kiski patikisan siihen. Jos minäkin mitä vitsi kavassa puolessa pilpi, kun minäkin pakassa mukaisessa muutsamassa. Muuttikin siitä maukassa haakta pakassa muutsamassa. Mä meitä minä metuskaa, kun niin pien mikä ei muutossa. Ja kuppati okavassa mukaisessa. Se on varmaankin vain. Mitäs? Kussa ponista. Käisikis keitämään. Panen ponista isikis keitämään. Se vaan mitä keitämään.
We have one more person, two clips from one more person, and this is Stella Neff from Misipawistik. And this person is your sister, Ellen. So let's see this clip of Stella Neff.
The memories I have as a child is the lifestyle that we lived as Cree people. And we hunted and lived off the land and ate off the land and the lakes and the rivers. There was no vehicles, so we were totally dependent on the river for travel, and then the dog teams in the winter. So living from the land, food-wise, and then clothing, because we wore moccasins and the things that were made by our grandmother that were totally made from moose hide or deer hide. When you live a life of off the land, and you hunt off the land and making pemmican and dry moose meat, and and then drying fish and then smoking it and looking after it. When that is gone, and it's gone. When you look at our land, how much has been destroyed, like how many square kilometers of water is our land was flooded. That's where the animals were. When we look at the missing animals, like the porcupine and the flying squirrel, and Sigag, the skunk was missing, but he came back last year. But things like that, you wonder what they liked about this land, and they've rejected it now. But I think we feel that too. I reject this land the way it is. I reject the way the water, what the water did to it, and then the excavation of so many gravel pits everywhere you drive is that ugly, ugly gravel pits that they just leave it like that. They don't think of repairing it. Most people, all they wanted was Manitoba Hydro to clean up the mess they left behind. That's all they wanted, to get rid of the driftwoods, because they had promised that our lake up there would be usable, that we could camp out there and we would be able to hunt up there, and there would be marsh birds, and there would be lots of ducks and lots of geese and lots of muskrats and beaver, and we could use that land. And Manitoba Hydro promise was 50 years ago was not one tree will be destroyed, that electricity they thought would solve or like make our life better. And
We have one more clip of Stella, and I just wanted to let people know that the next video clip contains a story connecting this moment in time, the arrival of Hydro to Misipawistik, to stories about parents being separated from their children. So this next clip will be difficult. Erin, could we see the clip, please?
all the things that we buy from the store would make our life better. But it wasn't the case, because the first thing they did, the province, was build a highway into Grand Rapids, and the next thing they did was bring the vehicles in and then build a beer parlor. And at the same time, they were hauling children away to residential schools. So every fall at this time, exactly at this time, they would be hauling the children to residential schools from this community. You know those big planes that used to come out, they go on the river, they make a lot of noise when they're taking off, you know, the Cessnas, it would take off, and we'd all go down to the dock. The dock is gone now, but we would all go down, the community would go down there and watch the children being boarded. And then the noise of that Norseman, after it left, it would go this way, go fly out this way, and then you could hear it as it headed toward the paw. And then listening to the whimpering of the parents as they cried. And then walking home from there, and so quiet, because there was no more noise of children playing. And that's the way it was all winter. There was only a few of us that were left here, and we missed each other. But one story I have to tell is about this one family that hid their children when the residential school came, because they hid their kids in the bush when the plane was coming. And the next day the RCMP came with their dogs, and they went across the river and they found them in the bush, the kids that they had hid them in the bush. And they took away the kids and the parents, because they had to go to jail because they had broken the law. So that was happening when Hydro was coming. And so when they built the beer parlor, what did the parents have to do, right? That's when they started going drinking. We're lucky that we can remember when life was good, because that's what keeps us going.
Thank you. Well, there's a lot of heavy stuff in that in this documentary that you made, Ellen. So when you made the documentary with the Interchurch Council on Hydrojustice, where did you end up getting to show this film?
I know we went one to Morden. We had a grand opening in Morden. And we showed it. We had an opening also at Flatlanders Gallery on Main Street. And then it was shown in various places. The photograph exhibit has gone around from one gathering to another, whether it's a conference or an education PD day or whatever it is. It's just traveled around to many different places. It was at Anglican Synod. It was at the Mennonite Central Committee General Meeting or whatever they call it. There's various places that it's been shown, and the photographs have gone along with it, with the documentary.
Some of the stories in the documentary, like for example, from Stella's story to Madeline's story and Betsy's story, they're the times where hydro has impacted their community is, began at different times in each of their communities.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the time when hydro came to Grand Rapids, it was like in the 60s, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then in Tatasquiac, it was later. I mean, the Kiosk Dam is still not operational.
Well, it is now, I believe. Or maybe it's not. The impoundment started in July, I think, where the water started going up to make the reservoir.
So they started flooding already this summer.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Madeline Spence's community, when was their community impacted?
Madeline Spence?
Yeah.
That would have been in the Churchill River diversion in the 1970s, I guess, when the Burntwood and Rat rivers were joined together to go into the Nelson River.
So it's quite a few different kinds of projects that
Yeah.
Manitoba Hydro has done. I think, the majority of the public isn't really sure about all the different kinds of things that Manitoba Hydro has been doing all over Manitoba. But the next sort of use of these photographs that you and the project that you did with Matthew Sawatsky is a video, a song video, I guess, called This Damn Shame. So we're going to show the This Damn Shame lyric video. And I love how, it explains things in it. Can you talk a little bit about how this next video came to be and how, who spearheaded it?
Well, it was mostly Amanda Layton that spearheaded it, and she wrote co-wrote the lyrics along with one or two other people from the organization, from ICH, and she thought, because of all that was happening with the Public Utilities Board hearings and the augmented flow program with the South Indian Lake people, whose fishing industry has basically been destroyed by Manitoba Hydro because of the fluctuation of the South Indian Lake, and we wanted somehow to bring this to the forefront, and Amanda thought this would be a good idea if if they did this this damn shame, because it is a damn shame.
And this is the augmented flow program that's affecting
Mhm.
South Indian Lake.
Mhm.
So just to kind of be clear about that, like there are licensing issues, and the initial agreement between Manitoba Hydro and the South Indian Lake community were that the water would fluctuate a certain amount,
Mhm.
but then Manitoba Hydro had it fluctuate, and that was so that people's livelihoods would be protected somewhat.
Somewhat, yeah.
And then they just really increased it quite a bit, like
Mhm.
by meters beyond what they had agreed on.
Mhm.
And then can you talk about what the effects of that are, and can we see the effects of that in the video?
Well, yeah, you see the how it affects the shoreline, right? And yet one of the statements that Hydro makes is that they don't affect the riparian systems, which means the shorelines of the rivers and lakes, and yet you see vast amounts of earth falling into the water because of the fluctuation, and it weakens the system, right? And we have these, we used to call them the apple core islands, where eventually the island would float away or disappear because it was there was so much water fluctuation. And yeah, it's a damn shame what happens. And South Indian Lake was trying to get Hydro to fulfill their promises and their duty to see to it that the augmented flow program is observed, and they wanted strict guidelines for Hydro, and nothing.
So in addition to like there being flooding with the hydro project in the first place, now you have like islands and shoreline that are disappearing. So that, like in some of the, I think it was in the clip from Stella before, we saw like all the logs are kind of the shorelines are, it looks like there's logging down the river basically, because there are all these logs like just floating on the surface of the river. And so the water must be just like full of this extraneous like mud and plant life and soil.
Well, that was in Grand Rapids. That's the way the reservoir looks in Grand Rapids, because what they had promised the people in Easterville and Grand Rapids, it was not one tree would be destroyed. And yet they went ahead, because of time constraints, they went ahead and flooded without ever removing any of the forest. So there was thousands of acres of forest that were flooded, and that's what you see 50 years later, still, trees uprooting and floating to shore, and it's just a disaster, especially for animals that are trying to go down to the water to drink, right? You saw the shoreline. How can they, get down to the water to get their drink or cool off, get away from the flies and the horse flies and everything else?
Yeah, that's what I like to do to get away from the horse flies. It's just right under. And I think when like Hydro calls itself green energy, it doesn't take into account the ever increasing effects of like the rotting trees and the methane gas that is given off, and how the water becomes poisoned and mercurized.
Well, Robert Spence from South Indian Lake had a picture. He took some water from the lake, and the water was just green. And he said, "This is what Hydro calls green energy."
Blech, sounds like antifreeze to me.
Yeah.
Or yeah, I'm just thinking of the Joker,
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's have a look at This Damn Shame, which is like a terribly sad song that actually sounds a little bit cheerful, but is not.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Not that long ago, some of you might even remember a hydroelectric project up north gathered a little attention. In the mid-60s, after they moved Chihuahuan, it came back around again. This time further north to South Indian, with plans to guarantee our generation. The Churchill River, which once flowed strong, over 1,200 cubic meters per second, was reduced to a trickle, turned around, and channeled in another direction. The community was flooded and forced to relocate. Their livelihoods could not be replaced. The cost of this decision can never be paid. For life there can be no compensation. So we ask you, Manitoba, if it were your home, what would you say? Let us stand together and protect the water from this damn shame. A water level promise on South Indian Lake was made to protect the whitefish population. In a backroom conversation, it was immediately changed to allow for major flow augmentation. The rise and fall of water tore the shoreline down, and still happens to this very day. When the impoundment is not needed, it's simply released, causing massive discharge devastation. So we ask you, Manitoba, if it were your home, what would you say? Let us stand together and protect the water from this damn shame. We turn on our lights and don't see past the message we hear. That hydro is green, our energy clean. We look away from the truth that we fear. But water is life and people have rights. Let's redefine prosperity. So let us stand together and protect the water that all of life so desperately needs. We're asking you, Manitoba, this is your home, what do you say? Let us stand together and protect each other from this damn shame.
Thanks for making that video, Ellen. There's a few things that I want to ask about that. And one of them is there's this one image where you see water in the front, and then you see all these yellow grasses. I think it's fall when you're up there. And then these trees just kind of sticking up out of the grasses. I think that's a photo of Cedar Lake. Can you tell me about that spot when you got to that spot?
Well, I don't really call it Cedar Lake. There were two lakes there, right? There was Cross Lake, the little Cross Lake, not the Cross Lake where the people live, but there was Cross Lake and Cedar Lake, and they kind of melded together when that reservoir was made. And that was the first time I had been on that reservoir, since I was a young girl, teenager, because when I was a teenager is when the hydro flooded that area. But we used to spend our summers going up the river, up the rapids, to go and do our foraging and gathering and hunting, whatever, to prepare for the winter, because we had no electricity and we were happy without electricity. We had to get enough food to last us for the winter. So we would go up there and we'd pick berries and dig root, to take to the groceries and to the grocery store in exchange for our groceries. And there was one particular place that I really loved, because there was always whippoorwills at night. When we'd fall asleep at night, we could hear the whippoorwill. And there was a place called Horn Creek, Misipawistik, we called it, little creek. And I wanted my brother to take me for a ride there so we could go see where we used to camp. And he said, "You're not going to like what you see." And so he took me there, and we saw this marsh-like area there. And I asked him, and I said, "Where is it?" And he said, "It's right underneath us here," he said, "underneath the boat." He said, "It's, underwater." So that was a sad thing for me, because I had not been in that area for 50 years. And it was such a sad thing to know.
Mhm. I think sometimes when we think about like the impacts of the land at these spots, really being destroyed, I think that it's not just like, oh well, it's for like it's once,
Mhm.
like it's like every time you think of it, it's as though it, in a way, if you think of time in different ways, but every time you think of it, it's another time, like where you're not looking forward to picking strawberries there, or another generation goes by and then it's another generation who didn't pick strawberries there, and it was something that could have been for all time. I'm just having a look at the time, and I want to talk a little bit more about reconciliation. And I mean, in the video, it talked about like, hey, people from the South, like it is worth thinking about that we do have a relationship between, the people in the South and the people in the North, and where the hydro comes from. And, that I was thinking about you and after COP26, when people were talking about electricity and electric cars, and where that energy is supposed to come from, and that is a whole other issue of what is green energy and what is green energy technologies, and certainly we haven't been hearing a lot of talk about the US buying so much power from Canada. But in light of this, is that where the electric energy for electric cars is supposed to come from? Like, is it supposed to come from sources like this? But I wanted to talk a little bit about UNDRIP, and I wanted to talk a little bit about free and prior informed consent. And I just have like a little slide for folks to kind of look at what that means, and people can do some research on free and prior informed consent, because I know you've talked about that, and we mentioned before that your father did not know what hydro was going to do to your community when he was taking people up and down the river. And so hydro certainly did not work on building relationships at that time. But I'd like to be able to get to a point where we talk about, you know, where you are making art to express your feelings about 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 the land. So I think we're going to go to a slideshow of a poem that you created with photographs from that your son took. And if we could remove, yeah. So can you read that, Ellen? Can you read
Not
that?
really, no.
Okay. So how about that? Can you read that okay?
Not very clearly. I don't have my reading glasses on. Is that as big as it'll get?
Can you zoom in at all on that, Erin?
Okay. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, can you read that for us?
Yeah. Gagawi no to Mother Earth. I knew you when I was young, your pristine forests, my playground, sparkling clear water lakes with their calm depths and white sandy beaches, haunting calls of loons as the sun is setting across the lake. I knew your fast-flowing waters, shallow meandering creeks with pebble bottoms, your trees, willows, flowers. I knew which berries to pick, which roots are medicines. I felt your warmth and softness when my bare toddler feet first walked on lush green carpet dotted with specks of clover. Nukum said, place your hand on the ground, feel. I felt the pounding of your heart like a rhythmic, soothing pulse of a drum. It was likely my own heartbeat. I believe Nukum knew it, but it was a lesson for me. I cherished your flowers, Kiwapigonima, covering the landscape with assorted beads of color as though painted by an artist's brush. Crocuses rising out of stony ground through a layer of snow in spring. No matter how harsh the conditions, delicate blossoms persevere, teaching us about resilience and hope. Elegant yellow orchids, your lady slippers, delicate lilac calypsos, fancy pink showy ladies growing in muskeg, to revere and marvel at, not to pick because they are a special class. Exquisite wild irises growing along the creek at Kaskastoyak, clothed in vibrant blue violet, like ballerinas dance with swaying bulrushes, lily pads and lilies performing a graceful waltz in the wake of the boat. Roses, sweet fragrant roses, so abundant everywhere. We ate the petals and the rose hips, but the seeds bring trouble. We Sakechak learned a lesson. Tiger lilies, bright red-orange hue growing along the tree line with cowslips and daisies, lending their own unique shades of color to the ground. I knew you as a child because of I loved you as a child because of your beauty and your abundance of life, breathtaking colors, blue skies, flowers, the foliage, trees changing into dazzling robes of golden orange in autumn, ready to dance their last dance. Tamarack, birch and aspen, goldenrod and fireweed, heralding bird migration. I should have memorized to say, the ancestors say, what, after the dance is over, the ancestors say, once the dance is over, you know the time has come to shed your fine attire and lay down, pulling the blanket of white over you to rest for a while. I knew you when I was young. You were vibrant, beautiful. You had so much to give. You were my playground. I slid from high banks onto the frozen river on pieces of cardboard, skated along frozen ponds, lakes, and rivers. I swung on a rope tied to a tree, jumped into the water. This was the life you gave me. I knew you when I was young, but we are older now, and time has done its work, altering our appearance as we age gracefully. You provided my life's needs, and you sustained me throughout. We are older now, Ligawi, but you are still beautiful. I thank you for your gifts. Nanaskamitin.
Thanks, Ellen.
Gee, I should have memorized that.
Thanks for sharing that. And the photographs were lovely. They were taken by your son.
Yeah, by my son, Kevin, yeah.
And I was going to show that, I was going to ask you to do that in context of some research that you're a part of, a research project that you're a part of with Dr. Robin Gregory at UBC and your responses to him. But we're going to keep going right now, just in our time, to another art project that you've been a part of, which is called the Sturgeon Marking Project.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if we can see that. So this photo here, what a big fish.
Mm-hmm.
That's your Uncle Valentine and your cousin McKay catching this huge sturgeon. It's as big as your uncle.
Yeah.
It's huge. I know you talked about how important the sturgeon is and was, and that, you know, one fish could certainly feed a whole family well.
Yeah, it's called ultimate foraging. Or optimal foraging, I should say.
So with the dams, you know, it blocks the sturgeon's pathways. So this is, you know, the lower Churchill River. And, you know, obviously there's not enough room for such a huge fish to swim around if this is what the river looks like here. So in some places there were sturgeon ladders that were built, and it consists of like these pools going up. You can see there, people can notice how a sturgeon ladder works. But can you also talk about the hydro pool marking project and how it came about, the sturgeon marking project?
Well, someone had heard about a project that they did in BC regarding the salmon, and they were painting yellow salmon on manhole covers, I believe it was, all over BC to bring attention to the salmon population. And in our ICH, we decided that something should be done to bring attention to the sturgeon, because when you listen to that video, that documentary that we did, a lot of the people will mention that there is no more sturgeon. There used to be our people, that was their number one preference for fish, right? It's a sturgeon. Because first of all, it doesn't have bones, like, you know, except for the outside, what do you call them? Not the scales. Anyway, they didn't have large bones.
Pokey all the way along, right?
Yeah.
Like a very pokey ridge on the top and on the sides.
So it was good for the kids to eat, and it was a very healthy fish. And you listen to the people in the north, they always talk about sturgeon and how they miss it because they, you know, well, someone catches a sturgeon, it's a big news in the community, and everyone wants to have a little piece to eat. And so we decided, because the sturgeon population is depleting so much, that we needed to bring attention. And it's all hydro related. I'm sure it is. Why, you know, because of the inability for the sturgeon to go up to spawn and increase their population. And I remember someone heard Sellinger, when they were trying to sell electricity to Minnesota, that someone heard him say there that they were building sturgeon ladders, but I have yet to see a sturgeon ladder anywhere in Manitoba. So we figured this was the best way to bring attention to get a stencil and paint blue sturgeon on hydro poles. So this is going to continue next summer, next spring.
Let's see how, let's see some of the next sturgeon slides. So there's like a how to do a sturgeon stencil, and our administrator is also going to put some of these links into the chat, as well as links for the films that we saw, and other ones that Ellen has been involved in, as well as other relevant films. And then we also have the stencil itself. So it's possible to download this stencil. And we were also, I just want to also invite, and if anyone is watching this and is able to type a question into the chat, we will answer those questions for you. So you're welcome to think of a question that you'd like to ask Elder Dr. Ellen Cook. I know that there are so many excellent sturgeon stories that you have. And if people are willing to, take the time to ask a question, we're totally welcome to do that. I think one of the films that we are going to post a link to has some footage from community members talking about consultation and about the Public Utilities Board as well. Just looking up the name of the film from 2005, which is Green Water, and it was made in the northern US. So it has a few other perspectives as well, from the relationship between, further south of the border and us. So are there any other sturgeon stories that you would like to share right now, or any up and coming opportunities to tell the sturgeon stories that you'd like to let us know about?
Well, NCI and U of W are partnering together to have Native storytellers come onto NCI and tell their stories. And they were asking if I would tell a story. And I thought that would be the thing to tell is about the sturgeon, because some of our people consider themselves a Namewe-Niniwak, which means the sturgeon people, right? Because we lived off the sturgeon. When my great-grandfather from St. Peter's Reserve realized that the sturgeon was being depleted on the Red River, that's when he paddled up Lake Winnipeg to go and settle in Grand Rapids, because the people all over Manitoba obviously had heard that the Saskatchewan River was full of sturgeon. So a lot of people gathered there to fish for the sturgeon along that river. So that's how my great-grandfather ended up in Grand Rapids. He was originally a member of the St. Peter's Band. And so I thought I would tell that story. My sister and I actually went to Hawaii in 2014 to a World Indigenous Peoples Education Conference. And we told the story of the rolling head. Tipipanistigon, it's called. The story of the rolling head has been documented since way back in the mid 1800s by various people across North America. It is a very common story, but it has different, a variety of I should say, it has a few differences in it. Like one of them doesn't say it's a sturgeon, it's the origin of the sturgeon. One of them says it's the origin of the sucker fish. But mostly it's about the origin of the sturgeon, and that the sturgeon originated from the rolling head. And the rolling head stories are very common, and usually the rolling head is seen as something that is a man-eating monster or something, you know. It's and in this case, in the stories that we told in Hawaii, it was about a woman and a man who ended up in a fight, and the man knocks his wife's head off, and it goes rolling around and in search of her two sons, and she you know, her sons run away from her, and she's rolling around and chasing her sons and saying, "Where are my sons? Where are my sons? I have to nurse them." Meanwhile, she has only a head, right? And she ends up trying to get across the river to get to the other side. So because her sons are on the other side of the river, and she sees a pelican swimming around because she can't go on the water just with the rolling head. And she sees a pelican swimming, and she asks the pelican to come over and take her across to the other side so she can feed her sons. And so the pelican comes and he says, "Okay, I'll do it, but stay off my neck because I have a very sore neck. Stay off my neck." So she gets on the pelican's back, and the pelican flies, and she's, you know, because she is just a head and it's rolling around on the back of the pelican, and it hits him on the neck, and he shakes her off, and she lands in the water, and she goes under, and then further down the current there, her head bobs up, and she's a sturgeon. And she says, "In the future, when there are people on this earth, I will be known as the sturgeon." So who are the people that we're fighting if there are no people on earth yet? So this was a time when animals could speak to each other or talk to each other, but, you know, and that's basically the same throughout all the stories, is that, you know, she says, in the future, when there are people on this earth, I will be known as, you know, and it's a kind of a strange story.
But, you know, if the sturgeon was going to be the fish that fed people,
Yeah.
certainly would have succeeded in her mission. Yeah. I'm just looking at our chat box, and we don't have any questions at this time from our audience. But I did want to also talk about, you know, I'm noticing in your work and in your you know, expressions of resistance, and the way that you're using art as resistance. I'm just curious, you know, did you think about, you know, making these projects before? Like, did you think, oh, I would love to make, you know, to have some photographs and you know, video of some of the beautiful things, you know, that are from your past? Or is it did they mostly come out of, really needing to communicate a message and the resistance that you're working at?
It was mostly to communicate the message that to people down south, especially, and I've been doing this for 15 years, educating the people down south here about how they're entering every time they use electricity, whether it's switching on a light or whether it's using their electric range or their microwave, whatever, that they're entering into an economic partnership with the people in the north. And they have to understand the sacrifice that people make for that wonderful convenience of electricity, and that, people suffer from, the development of that electricity. And people down south here need to know. And I've spoken to, thousands of students in Maples Collegiate and Garden City Collegiate and Morden and various churches and organizations, talking to them even now about, the impacts of hydro development in the north. In all areas, environmental, social, the physical and emotional well-being of the people in the communities, and to the animal habitats, everything. And that, how the sacredness of the water is compromised every time you pour cement into it, because the water has rights. The water has its own, in its own entity, has its rights. And we need to value that and honor those rights.
I love a quote that you made, which is that, the water is not going to speak to the politicians, and the animals are not going to speak to the politicians. So I have to do it. And you have been doing that for quite some time. And, the network is is necessarily spanning thousands of miles and kilometers. But it's also spanning a lot of different organizations. And we've got a few. I wanted to also say that, like the sturgeon, in terms of like what people can also do to remember that relationship, is to be mindful of the electricity use, as you've said. And there are also a number of organizations that you are partnering with, not just the Interchurch Council on Hydro Justice, but also with some of the other organizations that contribute to for example, the Waniskatan Research Alliance. That's also on the hydrojustice.org website, and some of the work that you do with them, also with the Manitoba Hydro Accountability Board, that you've also have relationships and work with, and the Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition, who is like someone that really worked with the This Damn Shame video. Erin's not booting us off yet. And I don't really see any questions coming up in the chat, but I'm wondering if you'd like to talk about some of those relationships that you've retained in your work over the years and that partner with you on some of these projects. I'm just going to say we're trying to post links into the chat as well. And there are a lot of different ways that people can educate themselves on, different ways that people in the South can educate themselves, get involved. Would you like to talk about some of the relationships that you have with these organizations?
Well, Waniskatan was started maybe about 10 years ago And it's a group of professors from the University of Manitoba that got a CERC grant, a research grant to look into the hydro impacts. And they knew already what we were doing as Interchurch Council of Hydropower, because the Interchurch Council of Hydropower is not a new entity either. It was begun in the 1970s when 5 communities in the North Norway House and Cross Lake and that were talking about the Northern Flood Agreement and negotiating with Hydro about the flood agreement, and they wanted to have an inquiry into it, so that people could advocate for them in negotiating that flood agreement. And government refused to hold that inquiry. So the churches got involved. It was a group of clergy that got involved and conducted this inquiry into that. And one of those, there was a few of them that I remember, Stan McKay and Doug McMurtry and Bob Haverluck, a whole bunch of them, Menno Weeb from the Mennonite Central Committee, that started this Northern Task Force. What was it called? Northern Task Force I can't even remember what it was called. And then it was the Manitoba Aboriginal Rights Coalition as well that were involved in that. And so it's not something new. And then, so we began kind of collaborating with Winneskatan, and they had lots of money that they were willing to share with us. So one of the things that we did was Interchurch Council on Hydropower was get a group of grandmothers together in Grand Rapids 3 years ago to talk about how are we going to heal and how are we going to help our youth in our communities, because our communities are sick. Our communities are not very healthy because they have those impacts still that, from the adverse effects of hydro development are still very, very common in those areas. So we had this group gathering, and we were going to have maybe about 30 grandmothers that came together from all the hydro affected communities. But just when it was going to happen, those fugitives ended up north in near those communities, near South Indian Lake and Split Lake. So everybody was kind of in lockdown mode. So we ended up with only 15 grandmothers that gathered in Grand Rapids. But it was a very good gathering. We came up with some plans on how we were going to start, working with the youth as grandmothers. And then COVID happened, so we couldn't gather again last year. So it's just, so Winneskatan gave us quite a bit of money to do that, and they're there as a support for us. The Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition, the same thing. We've worked side by side with them, and it's it's a growing thing. More and more people are becoming aware of what happens in the north when generating stations are built in the area,
And I
how
think
much damage they do.
I think people are, becoming more aware of environmental effects, and people are interested in hearing about, what is happening in the north. Why are, like, after the TRC, people are investigating more, like what they can do. Why are terrible things happening? Why, what can be done to boost mental health?
Mm-hmm.
So we're it's so wonderful to talk to you and to hear your voice, and to hear your stories, and to hear about how, you know, you're so involved with many different organizations. And I have to say, I went into a really deep dive learning about this is a very complex issue. And I also wanted to just say that one of the cool things that the Waniskaten does is also offers funding to do research or scientific posters. So it's just really using the visual, the visual medium to really sort of explain different relationships. And one of them I saw was about siloing, right? Which is when you have like each of these different issues, is separate, like, oh, mental health, oh, it's separate, from, oh, residential schools, oh, it's like separate, or effects of hydro, oh, that's a separate issue. But, that many, many things are interconnected. And so I can sort of see that in your life and your work, that many, many things are interconnected. You're such a very busy person. So we're very grateful that you've taken this time to spend with us, with me, really, but with us at First Friday.
It's been good.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're just going to offer one more opportunity for anyone to post a final question in the chat. And I think this is I'll just encourage our listeners to, if there's a lot of things you don't know about, or a lot of vocabulary that you're not really sure about, there's lots of, and you can't access the chat, if you look for hydrojustice.org and start there, there's a lot of personal stories from Elder Dr. Ellen Cook. You can see her video projects that she's been a part of. You can see the sturgeon marking project. And you can see This Damn Shame lyric video is also on there. And the poems are also on there. You could see photos from the Kukums gathering. And a lot of this work you can see there. As well, some of the partners, you can follow links from that website onto the different research and organizational partners. Do you want to say any final things, Elder Dr. Ellen Cook?
Well, I just wanted to clarify that Dr. Robin Gregory from UBC was hired by Misipawistik Cree Nation to do some research on adverse effects, because what happened was when Ovid McCurdy was chief in Grand Rapids, he had talked about taking the government to court for the lack of fiduciary responsibility in terms of that hydro project that was built, because there was really no informed consent, I guess you'd call it, because a lot of the people didn't have the language skills of the smooth talking politicos and the engineers. I recall, I think it was Marcel Moody was a chief of Misipawistik, had said at one time, I don't know who I thought I was to sit with these educated engineers and make deals with them, because when this Wasquatam has still not made any profit, right? And Misipawistik went into partnership with them, and so they're losing money every year, basically. So anyway, Misipawistik hired Robin Gregory to do this research to see if, in terms of compensation, what they could get from the government or from hydro. I guess it was from the government, because they didn't, they weren't there to advocate for our community when that dam was built. And it was built so close to the community. That's the thing, right? It was built practically next door to our house. And one of the things that I would like to have researched is how it affects, whether it causes cancer to have so much transmission lines in the area, right? And high voltage transmission lines. Because, shortly after that station was built, people started getting cancer, leukemias especially. So I'm kind of interested in that.
And it'd be curious as to how you would, what the studies would be like in order to have that, because if people started to, if people recovered from leukemia, or if they didn't, it would be a long time ago. So how that would be studied would be very interesting. One thing that I found interesting about Dr. Robin Gregory, and we're kind of jumping back, which is, and we'll post that link in the chat as well, which is that Dr. Robin Gregory from UBC does all kinds of work called decision research. And he's part of a website called decisionresearch.org. And they do all kinds of research on that has to do with like environmental consultation and how decisions are made and how to make a decision, even if there isn't any more information to be found, how people navigate their way through making those decisions, and what kind of information counts in decision making. It's not just necessarily scientific information, but it's also because people, stakeholders don't all have, as you were saying, stakeholders don't all have scientific information to contribute, but each person can certainly contribute data points to decision making. So thanks for clarifying that with the research that of Dr. Robin Gregory, and that that Grand Rapids and Misipawistik Cree Nation hired him to do that research. It's important, important work. Thank you for your important work today. And I can also say, Kananasko Mitinawa to you. Thank you a lot for sharing your stories and for showing us the art projects that you've been involved in, and telling us about your wide network of relationships and how you have navigated your story and telling us your story.
How Margaret go up mitten.
Go up mitten. I love when you taught me how to say that word. You just said, think of co-op and mittens. Co-op and mitten. We can see you again. I'm just going to thank our sponsors, which are there at the bottom of the screen there. We have the Manitoba Arts Council and the Winnipeg Arts Council. We also have First Fridays Winnipeg. And I also want to thank Collective Broadcast for hosting this broadcast and the streaming as well. And I want to thank our other administrator, Rachel Andrzejczyk, who works with First Fridays and is on the board. Thanks to the First Fridays board. And also to my other co-moderator who's not here today, Sarah Hodges-Kluznik. But most of all, thanks to you, Elder Dr. Ellen Cook, for joining us today. And I wish you a lovely evening.
Thank you, Sus.
Thank you.
See you again.
See you again, Co-op Mitten.
Co-op mitten.